What's up? Hello, how is everybody today? Let's take care of a few technical things. How's that? How are we?
Check,
Chris,
check.
how are you, man?
Good, how are you?
Deal. Let me pause this lo-fi background music. Gotta love the StreamYard amenities. So how was your New Year, man?
Uneventful, same old, you know. Didn't do much. My daughters are cheerleaders, so we always have like a assortment of 9 to 11-year-old girls over who spend the evening.
Oh, that sounds super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there there a few years ago. Cool. Yeah, that's one of those you'll get roped into making up different cheers and just throwing everybody up in the air. Been there.
I'm usually a judge. I usually try to stay out of the actual cheering, but I've gotten to the point where I can do some basic stunting.
Basic stunting. Yeah, there you go. Love it. Well, for the audience out there, give us the rundown. I know we just decided at the last minute just to go live with this one for the new year. Give us a little bit of background. Who are you? What do you do? because I know that my audience is going to raise some eyebrows when they find out what you do and the conversation that we're about to have.
So I'm Chris Rack. I'm the CEO of a company called MRP. We're a demand generation company based out of Philadelphia. I split time. I spend half my time in Chicago where my family sits and half my time in Philadelphia where the home office sits. So MRP, we have a variety of services that we offer to B2B technology and other B2B marketers, ranging from content syndication to direct HQL phone programs out of my call center in Philadelphia, along with turnkey direct mail stuff. So all of that is fueled by our proprietary, what most would say, intent data, right? I call it signals data, just because that's plural, given that I think most intent in the space is garbage. And I think we do it a little better on that side. So
Sure.
yeah, that's what we do. I've been in this space for 17 years. I've sold my first lead to a company in 2005, maybe, if not 2006. And I've worked across the industry at multiple places as CROs and even individual contributors. So it's not my first rodeo as it pertains to the industry, the space, the ups and downs of the different markets. I've seen a lot of this is going to take over, this is going to change this, the buyer has changed, all of that. I've seen 2 or 3 different renditions and versions of it over my 17 years.
Well, I mean, that's what we do as marketers. Just take the same old strategies, repackage them, call them something different, intent data, signals, whatever you want to call it, and put it back into the world, hoping it'll be the thing that sticks. Talk to me about CROs, because you were at Demand Science before, right?
Yes, I was the CRO of Demand Science before it was called Demand Science. It started out as a small little company called Pure B2B. When I started as a CRO of Pure B2B, it was a $5-6 million company. When I left, Demand Science was up around 135 to 140 in the 6 years that I was there. So we're one of the few companies who grew without taking any funding, no VC, no any of that. We were 100% bootstrapped, and we're able to profitably grow from 6 to 140 million, which isn't now is very, very popular. At the time, it was very unpopular because everybody, money was free, and VCs and PEs were throwing it around like it was, it was hotcakes. So, I mean, the CRO roles, I think, coming to a renaissance, if you will, right? It started out as this vision for, a single leader who owned the revenue team from both the sales and marketing standpoint.
Right.
It turned into was a glorified, fancy title for salespeople, right? And kind of lost its way. But I think as teams get a little bit more streamlined, you'll find that the CRO role will become more specific, right? The hard part about it is that there's just very few humans who could do it. There's a lot of folks who understand marketing and the marketing side of the house, but when it comes to managing and running an outbound selling operation or even an inbound selling operation, it's just a different set of skills. And there's a lot of great sales leaders who can't tie their shoes when it comes to marketing and attribution and outbound and brand and all of that. So finding the humans who can do it is very much a rare thing, which I think why the roles struggled a bit.
So in your experience, you've been in that space around that role and that role adjacent. Where did it come from, and why? Why the need to put everything together? I know that everybody has their own kind of opinion on the villainous origin story of the CM or the CRO. Well, throw CMO into that too. Of the CRO, but being in the trenches, what was it like back then?
I mean, the CRO really just became a position to replace one of the primary duties of the CEO, which is kind of playing aligning your go-to-market across all different industries, right? So I think the CRO role started to gain traction because there was a increase in both founder-led organizations, right? And also engineering and financial-led executives, right? So you had a lot more executives, CEOs, if you will, coming out of product, coming out of engineering, coming out of tech. You had a lot of founders who were coming up with, who were tech and dev and product people, right? And they were being tasked with making these not only decisions between sales and marketing, but also creating goals and aligning things from both a sales and a marketing perspective, right? And to be candid, they just weren't good at it, right? Usually what would happen.
That's a big ask.
Yeah, it's not easy. And so what happened is they created the CRO role to take that weight off a financial or product driven CEO, if you will, right? Aligning not only the goals, but the task and the vision across the entire revenue team became the job of the CRO. And then it lost its way and it became, I'm a VP of sales and I want to be a CRO because it's a big fancy title. And
right.
Now you have the plethora of, you can throw in chief growth officers in there as well too, whatever the hell.
Whatever. Yep.
So it eventually everything becomes the title chase, but the vision is a singular person whose job it is to align sales and marketing into a single path.
And which makes perfect sense. Like in my space, not like Tom, but like the industry in which I operate, am an operator. Like cybersecurity, tons of technical founders, that like it. So the CRO conceptually to me, it does make sense. But I also have a big bone to pick with it, considering that now everything it's not, instead of Barbie and Ken, maybe it's Barbie and it's Ken. Like now it's just sales and marketing, not sales and marketing. And that's the issue that I have, is that, does a lot of that come from, your VP of sales just moving into a CRO position, or is it VC backed growth at all cost bullshit? Like, where does that come from?
I mean, the sales and marketing being aligned into the revenue organization, if you will. I think a lot of it starts in the reporting side of the house. What happened is as RevOps grew, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And diving in a little bit deeper into analytics and reporting, everybody kind of started to realize how much the statistics tend to overlap, right? And really all the difference between sales and marketing is, I'll use the modern day ABM term. It all comes down to go to market, right? Marketing generally fuels an inbound go to market motion, while sales generally fuels an outbound go to market motion. Sometimes in some orgs, there's overlap with product led motions and community led motions and all of that. But really it comes down to attract, right? Or capture. It's generally the two fun. But what's happening,
sure,
especially now, is that organizations to be successful have to do both, right? And combining them and kind of treating them similar, it creates this. Everybody's trying to bridge the sales and marketing alignment gap, right? And it's just really, really challenging to do because there's just a whole lot of history in it, like that's deep rooted that becomes tough for folks to get past. So I think a lot of what you're seeing in the space right now and all this talk about revenue teams and go to market teams and really talking about sales and marketing in the same vein, right, is really it's more visionary than actual, right? And where it's rooted is in how both teams are targeted, right? Like
visionary versus actual, like that resonates. And it's interesting that one thing you said I want to call out is bridging that gap between sales and marketing. Why? Isn't this just as simple as alignment of goals and outcomes that you want to achieve with those totally separate functions? Why the need to join? Why that? That's at the root of what I've been trying to figure out, what I've been trying to, push back against and challenge a little bit is there a gap, and why is that a bad thing? Why are those boundaries bad?
I think there should be boundaries, but alignment, right? And I think the common perception right now is the best way to align is to combine, right? Like, I mean, you can't sit in any executive meeting or any meeting almost and not talk about the concept of silos, right? Every leader sits down and we have to break down the silos, right? And I think
Sure.
the easiest way to think about that is to obviously create a singular unified organization where there are no silos, but silos happen almost exclusively become of goals and compensation. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right?
Sure.
Like if like you could call it a revenue team, but if you're still targeting a marketer on one thing that doesn't align with how you're targeting the sales organization, they're going to disagree, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, everybody's going to run to one North Star, and that's keeping their job or getting paid. That's usually the first. I mean, outside of the 7,000 LinkedIn influencers who are just doing it because of the love of the game or, whatever the hell that is. But I'm not going to go there. That's a tangent that I'm not going to run down right now. But that's really what it comes down to. And almost all sales and marketing disalignment is a disalignment with whoever created the goal or the compensation structure. Marketing is tasked with X, right? And they're doing their job and they're saying, I'm doing my job. Sales is tasked with Y, and they're saying, well, I'm doing my job. And then everybody's doing their job and nobody's hitting the overall goal because the two targets and the compensation structures around those two targets never met to the same North Star. And that's where it fails.
Yeah. I've had so many of those conversations. I mean, since starting Dimension Therapy and posting my unhinged manifestos, people reaching out going, why am I responsible for closed won revenue? Like, what, like, does that make sense to anybody? Like, to be held to outcomes that I can't directly affect in a meaningful way? Like, how much sense does that make? And like, that's where I'm trying to like pull apart the tangled earbuds in B2B right now, where everybody's just kind of all in the same soup. And, we've got demand gen leaders running teams of BDRs. We've got sales doing their own thing and, writing cadences that don't go along with but it's all from an outsider perspective, or what's being presented, not even from the outside, but what's being presented internally is all the things we're doing is for alignment. It's, we're using terms like we don't want to be siloed anymore. Like I love that you brought up that term as well, because that's one of those that I go, that's just a word. Like it doesn't mean anything. And, you bringing up the point about what it actually looks like in practice versus just people waxing poetic on LinkedIn. It's kind of a mess right now.
There's a difference between being responsible for something and being compensated and targeted on it, right? Because I'd argue that we are all responsible for revenue generation of the company, right?
Sure.
Whether you're a customer experience rep who's right out of college, whether you're on the legal team, whether you're in product, whether you're an engineer, whether you're the CEO, everybody is responsible for the revenue of that business, right? But there's very much a difference between being responsible for it and being targeted and compensated against it, right? And what happens, again, it's an unfortunate instance that compensation tends to overrule responsibility, right? Like if I'm marketer X and my goal to hit my bonus, to put food on the table for my family, to continue my career growth, to continue my career projection is 5,000 SQLs, whatever the hell the definition of an SQL is.
Okay, sure,
right?
Yeah.
I all I care about is hitting it based on the least possible denominator definition of what somebody will accept as that SQL, because that's what will keep my job aligned, right? Even if that SQL goal, me hitting the number, contributes 0 to the revenue bottom line, right? And that's where the miss is, right? Because you as a demand marketer or a seller, at the end of the day, you have to be accountable. Like being responsible for the revenue number means that you're passionately driving not only your SQL number, but making that SQL number matter. And making sure you hitting your goal also turns into the most important metric, revenue. Because if it doesn't, then the whole company sinks, right? But there's too much. And again, I'm the unpopular opinion. There's too much. I did my job, right? You know, somebody else fucked up, and that's where you're seeing. And to be candid, like the past 4 or 5 years, all of these things have been masked by one of the most ridiculous economies in 20, right? So all of these blemishes, right? All of these silos, all of these mistakes, all of these, I did my job, have been completely masked by the next round of $120 million funding, being able to buy that 35% growth with marketing and sales budgets that are ridiculous, right? With the amount of inbound traffic or just sheer buyers in the space being more than you could even capture. So what happens is when you hit a tough macro like we're in right now, all of the blemishes come up. All of the makeup gets wiped away. And everybody's sitting with the actual reality that, again, the actual reality is not everybody is great at their job. And a lot of mediocrity has been masked over the past 4 or 5 years, and what's been a tidal wave of that. And again, that's both a selling and a marketing side of the fence, right? Like
I would agree. Yeah. It's, you know, you have to take the LinkedIn echo chamber. I mean, 1% of the people on LinkedIn actually ever post anything. Like there's so many different voices screaming out there. Just I'm one of them, passionate about X, you know, there are tons there, but you often have to be checked. Like you really have to check yourself or be checked by somebody else, somebody you trust that will go, not everybody thinks like you did. Like it's, you know, some people are just, they want to hit that MQL goal and just,
and it's fine to do that, right? But it will eventually catch up.
Right.
Like that's, and I know, I mean, there's a lot of people who are, I mean, again, it's the modern day 9 to 5. I got up, I put together my collection of gizmos and what's it for the day. I punched out and I had a good day's work and I provided for my family. But you know, in sales or marketing roles, right? Like unless you carry that core responsibility for the revenue of the company as a whole, you always run the risk of being part of a layoff in the downturn or having performance issues and all of that. Because the company doesn't, I mean, we're in a weird spot right now where a lot of the goals for companies are a bit unrealistic given that so many. So like right now is a tougher segment because you might be doing it and you might be passionately trying, you might be doing all those things. You're just not hitting the quote unquote goals because a VC previously valued your company at $200 bajillion. And now it's not, right? So like that will wane over the next couple of years as things start to rebalance themselves. But you know, like some of the best demand marketers that I've worked with, right? Sales and marketing alignment for them wasn't them owning a revenue number. It was them talking to sales.
Right.
That's it. That's what alignment was, right? He would call
conversations.
He would literally call and be like, "Hey, I'm sending over these leads. What do you guys think?" And then they'd be like, "Oh, these suck." Because that's what salespeople say, no matter what they are.
Of course.
Suck, right? But then really taking the time to like, okay, cool. Can you send me over a couple calls that I can listen to why they sucked? Can you give me some data or some stats about why we're missing and I can try to improve on my side? And again, having that push and pull conversation versus, you know, that's what sales and marketing alignment is. I'm doing this. Is it working? No. Tell me why. And then I might be able to highlight to you why you're missing. You might be able to highlight to me where I'm missing a little bit, but we're all running in the same direction, which is I want you to create sales.
That's one of those. Yeah, that's one of those things that I really truly believe that few organizations know what true sales and marketing alignment looks like in practice, because it's a lot of our Google Slides presentations. It's a lot of conversations with buzzwords and silos and marketers starting meetings addressing a sales team and everybody just turning off their camera within 30 seconds, like just boring them to death. And like I like that you bring up just talk, just have a conversation. Marketers often have to deal with the arts and crafts thing. Like that's y'all just want to make things look pretty and run all these cute ads and make a bunch of videos. Like we don't know what the hell any of that does. Like how does this actually, like I've told people before, if you want to have this instant sales and marketing alignment, just book a meeting with everybody and go, my only goal is to make you a shitload of money. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to do everything in my power to do that. Let's talk about how we're going to get there.
Yeah, it has to be. And the sales organization, given that it's generally easier to attribute revenue success to, right? I spent X and I got Y, right? Because you correlate headcount plus tools equals spend. Yep. You can automatically correlate headcount with opportunity with closed one deal, right? They have a little bit more of the power position in an executive chat about who's, so sales tends to bully marketing a bit. That's the reality of it, right? I'll say it, right? I've been the seller. I've been the sales leader. I've been in enough organizations where I've seen selling leaders come down and be like, like I'm not hitting my goal. It's marketing's fault. Right. Like, and
I don't think there's leave a comment if you haven't dealt with that,
right?
Because those are few and far between. Everybody's been in positions where you're just like, oh, I feel like I'm the band nerd and you guys are all the jocks. Like I was a band nerd, or vice versa, whatever your metaphor is. How have you dealt with that in the past? Like, have you, what's your experience?
I am an interesting, I've run and built and led large selling organizations, but I've always been the opposite, right? I've never been the, I guess you would call it the jock or the bro, like let's go. And, it's never been I'm an introvert, right? I mean, I spent my formidable years of junior high and high school playing chess, right? So I tend to see that opposite end of the spectrum, right? And I always, for me, protected that group, if you will, customer experience, fulfillment, marketing, right? The support functions of the selling organization. My personal vision, and I've gotten into numerous arguments with numerous sellers on that side, is that it's always your fault. If I'd ever had a seller come to me and be like, well, we messed up a deliverable and I'm not going to win the renewal here, I'd be like, no, we didn't, right? Like you're not going to win the renewal, right? That's your job. You're one of the most highly compensated people in the company. You own it, right? And there just aren't a lot of sellers and sales leaders who see that view, right? They're used to being coddled. One of my core tenets is that, a culture is only as strong as the worst behavior that you tolerate. And
I have a very similar mantra, which is what you tolerate is what you stand for.
Yeah. And a lot of times that's personified in most selling organizations, right? John is our number one seller, right? He's the best. So
he doesn't source his own pipeline. He doesn't hunt
the CRM.
Right.
He doesn't have to do reports. He doesn't have to do whatever. He's a special little butterfly. And because he generates revenue, that we're going to tolerate John, right? I never tolerated John. And the reason I don't anymore is because I used to be John, right? I mean, probably like when I was like 20.
Tell me about that. That's interesting.
When I was like 28 to 31, I was terrible. When I was really, really great at what I did, and I treated people like garbage. And I mean, I went through 5 customer experience people in 4 years of customer experience people who would just refuse to work with me. Not because I was mean but I just had, I work a lot. I mean, I made a lot of sacrifices to accelerate the trajectory of my career. And I just never understood that there were folks who weren't willing to make the same level. Right. So I would push and push and push and push and push to the point where a lot of people thought I was an asshole. Right. I wasn't maliciously. I was just, I had a certain level of expectations that I would put forward, and I did not tolerate less. And then I realized just like, yeah, I guess it's great to be the number one or the number two or to be that, but it's pretty lonely when you don't really you go to a company outing and all anybody ever wants to talk to you about is like, hey, tell me how to be good at sales, right? No one ever wants to talk to you about like, hey, how are you?
So how do you come out alive on the other side of that? Seems like you've made quite the pivot, which I gather there's some self-awareness, some deep introspection. You don't hear of a lot of people going, "Oh wait, I'm wrong."
No, I have it's an email that I wrote many, many years ago to my team that I keep kind of on file. And every once in a while I'll bust out and re-listen to. And the title of the email is called Gate B30. And the story is that I was on my way back home, right, from like a business meeting, and I was the one of the, if not the most successful seller at my company, at a previous company's history. I was one of the first 8 reps. I was the fastest to ramp. I ran but I was a director level person who ran a team of 12 that had the most revenue in the company. The company was going through some changes, and I had a calendar invite put on my calendar for Friday and said chat. And I was at Boston Logan Airport flying home from a meeting and hopped on, and it was my quote unquote new VP of sales who was just promoted. And he was like, hey, cool, we're going to let you go. And I was like, and the only reason that happened is because the dude who just got promoted to the VP of sales was one of the people that I stepped on over the years to get where I was from a success standpoint. Right. So it was an absolutely purely personal termination. Right. But the reality of it is that's not on him. That's on me. And at that junction, I was just like, hey, like, it's just not worth it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so it was at that moment. I don't want to say that moment, but that moment blossoming into the coming next roles where I realized that, like, hey, it's just way more fun to empower people, right? To take other people with you on the journey, right? Like that's really what's most fun, right? We're probably, judging by the gray in our beard, about similarly aged, right? Like,
yeah, I think so.
You reach a point where you can only buy so much shit. You can only climb so many mountains. You can only do so much stuff, right? And eventually you reach the top and you're like, oh, well, what's next, right? And for me, it's always been rooted in like the next is kind of taking the next generation of people along on whatever journey it is that I'm going on and seeing them accomplish goals and things of that nature. So that was my pivot. I would love to tell you, like I wish it would have happened earlier in my career, but it also came with age and just realizing that, like, hey, this is really who I am. And to be candid, the person who I was before was just kind of a front, trying to fit in with all the other sales bros who were just as sales broy. And I realized that I didn't have to anymore. And, that was me, right around early 30s into my now 40s are that.
Yeah, we're a lot more similar than I thought we were. Yeah, wow. So let's get into the weeds with work. Let's address the elephant in the room. Tell me why I'm on a call with a prospect who's wanting me to consult, and they tell me you come highly recommended. A lot of the stuff I've seen of yours, very interested in contracting you. We'll do pretty much whatever you say, except we will never, ever do content syndication. Do not ask.
There are some of those, right? I mean, and any part of the masses who clicks like on one of Chris Walker's posts are part of that, right? I guess you would say. But at the end of the day, right, I will tell them that they're wrong because mathematically, right, they're over term. And when I'm saying term, let's call it 12 months, right? If your ACV on your product is over 25K, it is almost mathematically impossible not to see return on investment with syndication with third-party vendors, given the cost of ownership of that acquiring that initial lead, right? Where most people fail is just doing it wrong, right? Taking a top of funnel lead and cramming it into a BDR's phone system, writing them a terrible script that says, I saw you just downloaded my white paper. Would you like to have a meeting? And then complaining in high volumes that those people aren't quote unquote ready to talk, right? Is where most syndication programs fail and fail miserably, right? Taking a syndication lead, acquired cost effectively, opted in, putting it in a quality nurture, right? I call it building a community, right? Like acquiring your target ICP. They trade their contact information and the ability for you to reach out to them for a piece of content that they dug, right? And that agreement allows you to communicate with them regularly via email, via phone, however it is that you want to engage with them.
Content syndication.
Right?
Yeah.
But you have to hold up your end of the bargain and bring them the goods, right? If you hit someone with a terrible experience after that first engagement, it's never going to work. Just like if somebody came to your website, the highest quality lead possible, filled out your contact us form, and you just as well gave them a terrible experience, then you would say that website forms don't work. LinkedIn, you name the tactic. If you don't hold your end up as a revenue team after that initial connection, none of those tactics work, right? But at scale, it will.
So I want to push back on that a little bit. You make a couple of good points, but some might interpret what you just said is it's not our problem. You just paid us a bunch of money, and you're doing it wrong. It's not us. So what part of your process in qualifying, let's say, an account is customer success and knowing that they're set up for success before they ever write you a check? Alternatively, how many conversations do you have to have with folks that go, this shit doesn't work, and you go, well, you did it wrong. Well, no, I paid you to do it.
I generally don't get to the point of it doesn't work, just because I and our team focuses a ton on expectations going into it, right? I will walk away from a deal if I have a clear indication that the expectations on the other side of it are off, right? Because that's just a waste of their time. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of everybody's time, right? So most vendors won't. Most vendors were like, I'm going to take the deal. And if they end up pissed off, I'll take the 30K and call it a nice day and get my commission and all of that, right? So that's
one quarter at a time. Yeah.
First and foremost, right? I will generally walk away if I truly feel that the expectations are completely off, right? Second, I spend a lot of time trying to educate people on the best ways to do it, right? I'll push back, right? Like difficult conversations are not just internal things. They're also customer facing, right? And really at the end of the day, what most customers want is they want to feel good about their purchasing decision. And generally feeling good about the purchasing decision means you're talking to somebody on the other end who knows their shit, right? And I say, like, a lot of times when I'm on a lot of calls, even as the CEO, I talk to 5 to 7 customers a week, right? So I don't sit up here in an ivory tower and say, this is how it's done, right? That like Oz definitely comes from outside of the curtain at MRP, right? And a lot of the time I use my words are, if I was you, I would do it this way. And I also back that with everything that I sell, I do, right? I buy syndicated leads. Right, I put them through a nurture. I score them up and pass them over to my BDR team. I use our direct mail product, right? I use the combination of them both. And a lot of times you believe it's interesting how powerful it is when someone becomes a meeting and then you try to sell them something. Like, well, how do I know it works? I'm like, well, I'm talking to you, aren't I? Like that. There's something inevitably powerful about selling someone something that you used, to put them through the flow. But again, it's almost exclusively about expectations over the long term, right? Syndication is a top of funnel mechanism designed to capture people early, either in your ICP or could or may have a problem. Communicate with them with quality messaging over time, until they have that problem. So you're the first person they think of when they do. That's the tactic, right?
So I get that it's a mechanism, and while I definitely would venture to say that we agree pretty heavily on Mr. Walker's point of view on a lot of different things. I was able to listen to your episode that you were on, Confessions of a B2B Marketer, and I wanted to bring up something along the lines of the conversation you were having about dark social content syndication and just that realm. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. To think that any marketer can roll up to their CEO, spend 50 to 70K on a platform, and when the CEO asks about a return, they say, "Don't worry about it. It's dark social." And you say that that is just a ridiculous concept. So my question to you is, what's the difference in that conceptually versus content syndication, not knowing how you're sourcing the leads or where they came from or where your intent data comes from, or regardless of whether or not simply downloading a piece of content is actually indicative of intent?
I mean, first off, the difference is attribution, right? It's generally one of the reasons syndication works well, and one of the reasons why it always has been, is that it's a fairly rudimentary and fairly easy attribution methodology, right? This person came in as a lead on X date, John Smith, right? And then correspondingly, again, in a large enterprise, we saw 7 other engagements from other people as leads from that same organization. 12 months later, that became pipeline. 4 months later, that became closed won, right? And any CEO can understand John Smith plus his friends over time when turned into pipeline, right? That's easy to understand. Again,
Sure.
Most executives are fairly simple-minded because, again, they're not marketers. They're product and finance and that, right? Whereas if you went in and said, "Hey, well, actually, we know that people are engaging with our ads because we're tracking site consumption ratios over time," right? We're seeing an influx in site from that account. We don't know who's actually looking at it, right? But based on those assumptions, we're going to attribute 1 to 1.5% of this pipeline from this account to this tactic based on this assumption, and that, right? Like I say it that way because, again, most executives will look at you and go, "What? Where did 1 and 1.5% come from? Did you just make it up?" Right? Why are we attributing it that? Right? How do I know that that the right people at that company were driving traffic to our site? How do I know that they came from the ad? Like, there's too many assumptions that are attribution is really, really difficult to connect the dots. And most executives, A, don't have time for it, and B, don't want to. Right. But if you tell,
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Any executive, if I said, "Hey, if you give me 100K right today on January 2nd, 2024, right, by January 2nd, 2025, I will be able to prove to you with 100% certainty that 100K generated at minimum 300K of revenue and probably 5x or $1.5 million of pipeline mathematically." Again, given you have an ACV of a minimum of 25K. The higher the ACV, the more ROI and the more return on long scale, no matter what the conversion of those leads are. Given cost of acquisition, if you bought at $30 a lead, 100,000, what is that? 30,000 leads at a less than 1% conversion rate from lead into meeting, into qualified opportunity, into pipeline, into sale. You are almost guaranteed to have return on your investment, both pipeline and revenue attribution. Almost any executive will get it. They will understand it. The biggest sell you have to do as a marketer is the time point, right? You're going to give me this 100K today. I'm not going to be able to give you that return tomorrow. That's not how this works, right? But this same time, a year from now, I will guarantee a 3x return on your spend and a 5x return from a pipeline standpoint that could grow from there.
So it sounds like the conversation is more based on vendor and executive, not vendor and marketer. So
That's a marketer executive combo. That's not a vendor executive combo. That's a marketer exec combo.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Got what you mean there. So I want to talk about intent data. How long does it take for someone's actions to reach data streams and then to black box intent data platforms?
Not all. So the first thing I'll say is not all intent data is created equal, right? Everybody, I mean, anything right now, almost anybody in the world is kind of grabbing that, jumping onto that and calling it intent data, right? Some of the largest platforms that, again, I'm not a name person, but really, really large, heavily invested platforms. Most of the intent data on those platforms is just people who come to your site.
Sure. Well, the confusion from marketing practitioners is, of course, there's confusion. Vendors won't tell us, and so we don't know. We just have to.
Our algorithm.
We just have to trust you. Like I know for a fact that there are a couple of different vendors right now that are being investigated by independent researchers on generating AI profiles to validate multi-touch attribution. We would never know that. So, like, how are we supposed to know what intent data actually is outside of reading a 157 page paper from MIT that was published a few months ago? Like,
the intent data in theory, right, is every buyer at some point of the process thinks of something, right? We all have thoughts, right? Most of the common thoughts in the buying process in the B2B space are things like, can I afford this? Do I need this? Right? Which vendor should I use? Right? What do my peers think about this software? Like these are the thoughts that pop into your brain across the buying process. That would indicate to a vendor in the space that a company is showing intent across the stream, right? Capturing those thoughts, those actions along the ecosphere of the web or the internet or whatnot is not an easy thing to do, right? Almost all intent in the space right now, I can tell you, almost 90% of the vendors are bid stream vendors, right? They buy,
sure.
They either own or buy bid stream data to try to catch website traffic to loosely correlated content on that site and classifying it as intent. Clark happened to go to a website that had the word HR software on it in some form or fashion. Therefore, Clark in demand gen therapy is looking to buy demand gen software. That's 90% of intent in the space right now, right? And most companies can't tell you why, because they just say things like, "Oh, our algorithm is built to blah, 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 blah," right? It's the equivalent of if somebody happens to read an article about weightlifting, does that mean that they're looking to buy a gym membership? Maybe, but probably not, right? I think if you're looking and again, there are other types of signals that are great signals, but don't have the scale that a bid stream would do, right? And the bid stream, while it gives you scale, also gives you a ton of false positives, right? So I think if you are looking for an intent vendor, right, if you're trying to catch someone, find someone who's aggregating multiple signals, who's cross-referencing that, right? And again, I'm not tooting my own horn, but my company does it because I'm a huge believer in the aggregation of signals. And I will passionately try to accumulate, combine, and score as many different signals as I can get my hands on across. So like right now,
Sure.
I combine a bid stream, which is valuable, but not ever present, right? I buy data from some of the largest review sites, because obviously going to a review site and looking at a category or a piece of software is a great signal to look at. I aggregate engagement with different types of content across the funnel, right? So I look at who's engaging with case studies on a topic, comparison reports on a topic, white papers, because each, that type of content aggregates from that. And then I have a call center, right? So I have a call center that makes 10 million calls a year. And on those calls, I ask people, IT decision makers, agents, what are you looking to buy this year? I collect that data and I add it into my system. Each independently of those could be intent that I could sell to you. And it may or may not work, right? Given that, again, my call center data is really high quality, but there's just not enough of it, right? The bid stream data is really high volume, but I get a ton of false positives. But
so what happens when all the vendors are claiming all of this?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to ask them which sources are from, right? If they won't tell you, right? If someone won't tell you how their scoring works, right? Again, mine is fairly, right? It's if this then that, right? Like, so my intent score comes out of the system where if I believe that of those signals that I just spoke to, my phone based signals are the highest value, so I give them the highest score. Right?
Makes sense. Yep.
Combine that with if that person, right, who has the phone based signal also happen to view a review site, score from there. If they have all 4 signals, higher. So again, it's a fairly simple mathematical process. But where most vendors get into the algorithm and proprietary and all of that is because, again, they're likely just using a bid stream. And again, that's not exactly the sexiest story.
So to backtrack to a question I had earlier, how long does that take? Because there are a lot of conversations happening now over first party intent versus third party intent. I'm a huge proponent of first party intent. It's going to take me longer, but that's a bet I'm willing to make on quality, right? And of course, not having to have a huge chunk of my budget on some black box that I don't know how the sauce is made, or where, if it's actually, like you said, is indicative of intent, or if it's the same stream that every single one of my competitors has access to. The conversation seems to be that, go first party as best you can, because, well, the entire argument is predicated on the notion that if you are using and relying heavily on third-party intent data, then you're too late.
What's define first party?
Yours. Brand.
Okay. So like
just holistically, brand.
So like someone coming to your website is how you would track first party engagement, first party intent.
Not only, but sure, part of it. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think
owned media versus paid distribution, content syndication, that yada, yada, yada.
Right. I mean, I would argue if by the time someone gets to your brand, right, either your website, something of that nature, they might have already made a decision, right? You could be a comparison vendor, right? Somebody I'm just filling out the secondary RFP for, right? So like the real goal of intent data is to not find people who are the most apt to buy, but you're trying to identify the folks in your ICP who are the most apt to have a problem that you can solve for, right? That's why I mean, again, like you're not trying to catch lightning in a bottle, right? You're trying to get out ahead of it and communicate to a group of people in a way. This is why most of the use cases for intent aren't just catch fix, right? Like find person, call them, set meeting, that, right? Like,
sure,
understanding that somebody at John Smith & Company may be interested in HR software because of a performance management issue or a payroll issue or or something of that nature, right? Being able to communicate to them with things that they may be thinking about, right, allows you for a higher propensity to become or be seen as a thought leader, right? If somebody's speaking your language, if you have a problem and you see an ad or somebody or an SDR reaches out to you, or the tactic is irrelevant. If I'm frustrated with my team's performance management, or my CEO came to me and said, like, hey, we need to put together a performance management platform, right? We need this, right? I'm like, and then within 3 or 4 days, I get an email from a BDR that says, performance management challenges. You're like, fuck, is this guy in my head? Right? Like, how did that, so every B2B vendor in the space, from Google all the way down to syndication vendors, are trying to solve for what is the mecca of B2B demand and marketing. And that's good timing. That's it. Right. That is, and I always give this example to anybody who will listen, because I talk a lot. If I gave you a Post-it note and I wrote 5 company names on it, and you called all 5 of them and you set a meeting with 3 of them, you would pay me $10,000 a month for that Post-it note if I was able to do that consistently. But in marketing and sales, we spend so much time talking about tactics and executions and what's a good email template, or should I do ABM, or should I do display, or should I do syndication? It's like, really, if you find a vendor and if you can become a vendor who can solve for good timing, right? A shitty email that's well timed will outperform the best email at a worse time, right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, but I think that I would. I mean, yeah, obviously it's timing for sure. I mean, what is it? 5%, 3% now at this point? Who knows? You know,
It depends.
of your, you know, whoever's in market to actually buy. I think my side of that is, I don't want you to show up in any data streams. I want you coming to me first. I want you knowing my brand before you ever have the problem. I want to stay as top of mind as humanly possible and be providing as much value as I can, that you don't fuck with those other guys. Like it's not even an issue. Like, you come directly to us. And so that's where the whole first party movement comes from, because another thing that, like, myself as a marketing leader and as a consultant has to consider is the cost involved in that, but also the fact that every single one of my competitors has access to the exact same stuff. And so if everybody signs up for 1234cents.com, then where's my competitive advantage?
Yeah, I mean, in what you're describing is what I've referred to as kind of like a, you know, intent overlap, right? Which is a very common thing, right? The sources are generally the same, but that's why, again, it can be valuable, right? But most marketers just need to educate themselves beyond the fancy marketing speak that comes from the vendors, right? Beyond the $200 million funding sales and marketing machines that are out there, and really understand what it is that you are buying, right? Like, and again, that's why, and again, I'll come back to it, right? I mean, content syndication is a great mechanism for building that first party intent. You acquire the agreement to engage with a contact in your target ICP that you know is there. Company size, you know their company size, you know their title, you know their all of that, you know they're your person. And then you agree to be able to engage with them with your content to where once they reach that threshold, right? You know, you're trying to become that thought leader, but that indicator. So like, that's one of the most cost-effective ways to build that first party intent network. Right.
It's interesting. That's the first time I've ever heard content syndication referred to as generating first party intent. Because to me, if it's a vendor that's third party, and like I know like you guys are doing something different. But you know, for the run of the mill demand gen marketer leader that's just vetting vendors when it comes to intent data or syndication or, you know, whatever ABM strategy nonsense they've repackaged and sold back to us as a product, you know, whatever it is this week, I think I have to consider that there's not enough transparency for me to make an educated decision when I know that if we're building a brand, then I know that quality. I know how the sauce is made. I know exactly what into it. I know what I can get out of it. Because at the end of the day, you can give me all the guarantees you want, or you can, you know, the numbers that I can effectively communicate to an executive that like, okay, this will get us this and this. And they're like, well, how? And I don't know. We still, there's still that level of dark, you know, dark vendor.
But in brand, I mean, how are you building it, right? You still have to reach people, right? You still have to get your message out in front of them, right?
Yeah.
So where syndication, again, it almost exclusively fails in two ways. One, people are still kind of calling them leads, right? Where I would say, like,
I hate that.
The word lead it's a misnomer, right? It is
Yeah.
a syndication is an agreement, right? It's an agreement that you gave me a piece of content that I wanted to check out, right? And that agreement says that you can communicate with me. That's it. Like it's an agreement to allow someone to communicate with you, right?
I like that you make the clear distinction that it is, and I don't want to speak for you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like your stance is it really should be considered top of funnel, and then there is a handoff, and then it is you. Period. So like, where does multi-touch attribution come into that, and how are you structuring like different pieces of content to then relay your intent data based on your own distribution?
I mean, it depends on the types. It depends on your target audience. It depends on the type of touches that you're executing upon and how you're attributing to them, right? I mean, the biggest grind I have with this concept of, and again, this concept of like build this dark social network, right? Or this dark network is that is that everybody goes online, right? Like how, I mean, if you're selling ERP software, how often do you think VPs of finance and COOs are hopping on LinkedIn to check out the latest podcast, right? Or how often, if you're selling packaging equipment or you're selling robots to manufacturing, and again, these are, by the way, hundreds of billions of dollar industries in B2B, right? Yeah. Like the fact that like the common messaging is like, hey, I'm going to put a podcast out, right? And that's going to drive engagement with the podcast. Whereas like there's an entire segment of humans who buy billions of dollars worth of stuff who have no idea what a podcast is.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I mean, if I'm selling,
you'd be astounded by how many executives are not even on LinkedIn.
Exactly. Right. So like if your primary go to market starts with build a social network and a dark social and podcast and brand and all of that, right?
Be cool.
Right. If that's your primary go to market,
I get that. And
the humans that you sell to don't do any of that, then your go to market is it's bound to fail. So that's my biggest beef with it, right? Is saying that all you have to do is, like create a podcast and build your brand and become a thought leader, and all of that is like relevant, but it's really, really great for SaaS and tech and selling to salespeople and selling to marketing people. Really, really awesome for it, right? Selling to doctors, selling to CFOs, selling to, in some cases, like all of those other personas outside of sales and marketing come to LinkedIn almost one time a year when they're looking for a job, right? And again, LinkedIn would love to tell you otherwise, but that's complete bullshit.
Yeah, imagine having like a really successful like drywall repair business in like the South. Like, is that where your audience is? Like, this is why I'm such a huge proponent of just talk to your audience. Like, just tell me what I got to do. Like, this is a game. I've got shit that I think would bring value to you. You have problems. Just help me help you. Whatever, and then shut your mouth and just let them go on.
It just comes down to being where your audience is.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that I've always said. Like your competitors, even they're not your competitors. I mean, especially when it comes to like marketing. Like you're in a war over people's attention. So like your competitors aren't the names of companies. Your competitors are cheerleading practice and irritable bowel syndrome and dogs barking and having to be at this. Like it's everything. And so it's getting weird. I mean, I'm in cybersecurity with all the issues that TikTok has had. There's still CISOs on there just mainly complaining about marketing, and I totally don't blame them at all. We're trying to fix that. But you got to be where they're at. And so we're really aligned on that. I think it just starts with a conversation with them. I definitely agree with how you kind of baked in everything. Is like, you can't, I also love the example that you gave with the podcast. Like, yep, let's just start a podcast, and then pipelines bursting at the seams. Like it has to be an ecosystem. So, I mean, I know we're reaching the top of the hour here. So, let's wrap up with, if you're a marketing leader that is just in the weeds trying to vet vendors or decide if it's what you should do or shouldn't do, what are the things you have to consider? What is some practical, like actionable insights that can help navigate these waters for people that are done with the bullshit?
I mean, my favorite question is show me the worst case scenario. If I'm vetting a vendor, right, I ask that question. Show me the worst case scenario. I give you $50K. Show me what you would perceive as the worst case scenario.
I like that one.
Again, that's why with syndication, I'm so passionate about it. Like, worst case scenario, 0.5% of these 10,000 leads convert into pipeline. Worst case scenario, you're going to your boss and saying, I spent $50K, I got 100, right? I didn't blow it up, but I sure as hell didn't lose, right? Whereas it's something like, like worst case scenario with a platform or even display or something of that nature. I spent $75K and I can't connect the dots, right? Like that's the first question, right? Show me worst case scenario. At the end of the day, I'm going to go to my boss and have to show him something, right? And if I can't, then I'm not going to buy from you. And that most people miss that part of it, right? Second is tell me how, right? And as soon as someone says like algorithm or then be like, no, tell me how. Like, how does it like I try to explain things that again
give me like the three buzzwords, like strike three and you're out. If you're just saying algorithm and whatnot, like get out of here.
I try to explain what we do as if I was explaining it to my father, right? Who again doesn't social, doesn't, he just got a smartphone, right? But if I can explain to him, and what I do is I say, Dad, I look for people. My dad works for a shower door distributor, right? So I said like, hey, every day somebody goes online and types in shower door research or something of that nature. I help people find those, right? So if you're spending your money, you're making it as efficient as possible, right? That's the key. There is no magic bullet in the space, right? If anybody who claims to be, right, that's your first mistake. If someone says like, all you need to do is use my platform and you will be successful, then you're running.
Red flag number 0. Yeah.
Right? But it just comes down to, can you make me a bit more efficient? The haystack is really big. I still need to find the needles in it. My budget's lower this year than it's ever been because of the macro. My team is smaller. I don't have the time. I don't have the bandwidth. Please help me find the needles, right? And that's really what you need to identify. So ask someone, how can you help me find the needle, right? And if they don't tell you how, like a common vendor will say this, like, oh, we aggregate content consumption across 600,000 websites, to contextually identify those engaged, like that whole sentence, right? That whole sentence means we use a bid stream.
Your script.
Yeah. Yep. Like that. Like if someone can't say I use a bid stream, right? Then you probably should move on.
Plain English.
Like it's an interesting space. I mean, like we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar space. That, and it just has to come down to expectation setting and having real conversations from customer to vendor, right? I've walked away from more deals than I've taken in some cases because I have a feeling that the expectations from the customer side of it are higher than what I know I can deliver. And when that happens, that's a lose-lose, right? It's never, because it might, usually what happens, Clark, is it's someone at a smaller company, right? Who's an up and coming marketer. And most vendors will say, if I lose this deal, whatever. If I piss off Clark, right? I got 30K, it's a nice commission. But what happens more times than not, and again, I'm 17 years in, eventually Clark becomes the CMO of insert top 5 B2B software vendor with a $40 to $50 million budget. And Clark always will remember the time that you sold him some fucking magic dust, right? And he had to go to his boss and look like an idiot, right? But Clark will also
every single time.
He will also remember the time where that person looked at them straight in the eye and said, I'm not a good fit for you right now, right? And I'm not going to sell you something that I don't believe you'll see success in. That's that's it. If your vendor is willing to give it to you straight and say, hey, this is exactly what I can do, and if that works for you, and I'll passionately do anything I can to be successful, right? Then that's your vendor, right? But if they're also willing to say, I'm not a good fit, then, that's
for all the salespeople listening right now, don't just use that as a tactic. If you say that, mean it, because those are relationships that will last your entire career. If you say you're going to help somebody, just mean it.
Every salesperson says that I'm passionate about helping people. Most are passionate about just collecting checks or the chase or the puzzle or the ego with all of that, right? But at the end of the day, like that's one of the reasons I enjoy MRP so much, because I have a product suite that's diverse enough that I can truly solve for different things. And if a customer says I have this, I can solve for it. In some cases it's syndication. In some cases it's using our US-based high quality team and paying $500-$600 a lead versus 30 to 40, right? Given that some cases it's direct mail, because like IT security and IT decision makers are one of the top people in businesses that engage with mail regularly.
Yeah.
Actual mail, like coming in.
All right, Chris, quit selling shit. We got to get out of here. Man, this has been awesome. I really, really appreciate the back and forth. This is one of those conversations that I've been wanting to have, particularly with a vendor. Really glad we got connected. Yeah, man, we're definitely going to link to everything, and whatnot. Shout out anything we can. Thanks for the insight, man. I really appreciate the conversation. And to anybody listening or still watching the live right now, comment, connect with Chris on LinkedIn. Any questions you have? This has been great, man. I really appreciate you joining me.
Appreciate it. Happy New Year, Clark. I'm glad we were able to kind of connect, and I look forward to more of your manifestos as the year rolls through.
Absolutely. I'm sure there will be more to come. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody listening, and we will see you all next time on Demand Gen Therapy. Check us out.
Take care.